This is a podcast on the unique self-emergence process, which is a program with Claire Molinard and David Cicerchi. Now, I met both of these incredible people through Dr. Marc Gafni at the Center of World Philosophy and Religion. I met David back in June of 2023 in Vermont at the board retreat there, and I met Claire in Belgium at the Mystery School also in 2023. And it was a real delight to have both of these on talking about this incredible program and process to take people through this unique self-emergence. If you aren't familiar with unique self, it was a term really coined by Dr. Marc Gafni through his realization that in Western Enlightenment, we have this idea of, separate self, which is all about the dignity and the individuation of the separate individual. And then there's true self, which is the Eastern Enlightenment, which is no, you aren't an individual self. You're part of the field of consciousness. You're a part of the one true self. But unique self brings the two together, which is to say, you're both. You're a unique expression of that love intelligence. And with that, you have a unique perspective and you have a unique gift. And the unique self-emergence process is a 9-month process to take people through that full emergent process. This is the first time I've done a podcast with two other people, and it was an absolute delight to have both Claire and David on the podcast to be able to share about this amazing program that they are about to release. If you are interested in finding out more about it, then there are going to be links in the description below so you can find out how to get involved if it calls out to you, if you enjoy the energy of both Claire and David and you feel called to be involved with that. All right, that is it from me. Before we do get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit like if you get value from this episode. And if you haven't yet subscribed, it would be amazing if you did that as well. All right, let's get into it. So, as I was saying, this is the first time that I'm doing a podcast with two other people. So I'm very excited for this new dynamic. And thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Sabri.
it's a pleasure.
So David and I, we met for the first time in Vermont back in June at the board meeting for the Center of World Philosophy and Religion, as headed up by Dr. Marc Gafni. And then Claire, you and I met for the first time in Belgium at the Eros Mystery School.
That's right.
Yeah. And David, when you reached out and said about the two of you coming on here, I was delighted. I was excited for this and to be able to hear really both of your stories more in full, because I find that often in these types of things we can meet people, we can feel each other's energies, but then often we don't really know all that much about the background and how people got to where they were and what their journey was. And especially with the teachings of unique self and the importance of story, it seems like the perfect thing to do on here is to kind of get into the story and how that weaves together, and then what you guys are doing with the unique self-emergence process.
Yeah, I remember that first night that you flew in to Vermont, and we all went out to dinner. There were like 15 or 20 of us, and I kept being concerned about your jet lag. I'm like, hey man, are you okay? Are you okay? Like, do you need to go home and sleep? And like, hey, I'm just checking on you. And at some point, you're like, I'm okay. All right, I'm good. Like, we're good. I'm like, okay, he can take care of himself, right?
I missed the connection flight, so I flew to JFK, and then the connection flight was cancelled. So I think there was an extra 16 hours on the journey. So I think by the time we were out eating, I was about 40 hours in.
Oh, yeah, that was rough.
Yeah, I felt good though. I was feeling the energy, so I was
You
alive.
did. You seemed okay. I just was like, how can he be okay after all that?
Yeah. So let's find out. I'd love to now just take this time to actually find out a little bit more about each of your stories individually and kind of what unfolded for you to get to the point with the center and Mark and being a part of everything. So ladies first, maybe.
All right. So where do you want me to start? Because it's a long story. Maybe I'll start in the middle. I'll start and tell you how I met Marc. I met Marc in 2013. I knew of Marc before because I was at the time I was already an integral coach, and I was in the integral world. So Marc's name was known to me and his work was known to me, but I didn't know him. So I met him through his book, Awaken Your Unique Self, in 2012. And when I read the book, I was completely blown out by it. And the reason why I was blown out by this book is because I was going through, at the time, I was going through a sort of a dark night of the soul. At the time, I was in my early 40s. I had been a spiritual practitioner and seeker my entire adult life. I was obsessed by the question, who am I? Basically, it took me through, meeting a lot of teachers and trying a lot of things. And when I met Marc, I was a Zen practitioner and I was really serious about it. I was going to sessions, like Vipassana retreats, but for Zen people, where you sit for 12 hours a day and just like really rigorous practice, very masculine. And I had a few years before that, I had a very I had a first awakening experience where I was awake. My experience in this particular awakening, that first awakening experience, was an experience of outrageous love. Now I have words for it. I just like blew up. I mean, it was like very much later on in my life, I took medicine journeys and had that same experience on medicines. But at that time, I had no idea. And I just became love. It was all love. I was love. I mean, there was no I. It was just crazy love. And when I came back from it, I brought that to my Zen teacher. And the answer was was very Zen. Go back to your cushion. Let go of the experience. Just sit. And I knew there was something really wrong with that. It was just it broke me. It actually broke me and threw me into a sort of a depression. Not because I wasn't told, oh, great, you had a great awakening experience, you're enlightened. That's not the point. It was just, it just didn't acknowledge my, what I had fell into. And it was just too impersonal for that experience. So there was and it's only when I read Unique Self that I understood the trauma. It was actually a trauma that I had, that answer was traumatic to me, and it put me into a depression. And my depression was really about, what do I do with this? How do I'm awakened, but the world is still in pain. What do I do with my awakening? And there was no answer because there was no dharma. Yes, there is this idea of coming back to the marketplace in Zen. So I shouldn't say there's no dharma, but it's vague. They just talk about it in a story. But there's no, actually, in my case, my teacher did not give me a path forward. So when I heard Dr. Marc Gafni speak about unique self and explain to, in his brilliant book, that true self, awakening to true self, which is awakening and having an enlightenment experience, having an awakening experience, is just the beginning. And then unique self can be on board. That really blew my mind. So that's a little piece of, how I got into unique self and why I'm so passionate about it.
Wonderful. And for people that aren't familiar with the terms separate self, true self, unique self, could you give give a
Sure.
little overview, a little snippet of each,
Yeah.
just in case?
Yes, of course. So, separate self is, this Claire, that person here speaking to you. I'm in my personality. I have, I'm identified to who am I? I'm an integral coach and done this. And even when I tell you about my story, it's my story as a separate self. And so that's what the the personality construct of Claire Molinard. That's my separate self, and there's nothing wrong about it. It's my individuated self, and it has an ego, right? It has a identification to a personality, and so I won't get too much into the theory of that because there's just a lot of layers to it. But basically, that gives you an idea. Claire Molinard. I'm Claire Molinard. I'm an integral coach. I'm a mother of three adult women, and I live in Corsica. And that's my separate self. True self is what I touched into when I had that awakening experience. I fell into a field of infinite love. Sometimes it can be a field of emptiness. It depends on your awakening. Basically, there's all kinds of awake, tastes of true self. But basically, it's not. There's no me. So when you're having an experience of true self, there's no one having it. When I fell into that field of love, there was no Claire. It's only when I came back that I thought, oh, I had an awakening experience. So that's true self. It's the one field, the field of oneness from which we are all a part. And there's no difference between Sabri and Claire and David in that field. That's true self. Unique self is the part of me which came back from that experience and knows there's something I must do with it. And that's why I fell in such I was like depressed because I didn't know what to do with that. It was unclear to me, but I knew I wasn't the same anymore because now I could feel that field moving through me. And that's my unique self. So the unique self is the activist, is the human being who comes from that place and says, puts a stake on the ground and says, I am here. I'm ready. So that's unique self.
Amazing. Thank you for that. David.
Yeah.
Give us
I'm
your life
here.
story.
I'm ready.
So, same thing. Tell us about David uniquely.
Yeah, and like Claire, a good place to start is there was life before Mark and the unique self Dharma teaching, and there was life after the teaching, since the teaching. And I met Mark in 2009 at an event called Integral Spiritual Experience in San Francisco area. But in years leading up to that event, I was raised in a Catholic family, so that was my background of very different from Claire's kind of ultimate like religious path of Zen, kind of Eastern spirituality. Mine was Western spirituality, right? And so I was raised in a sense of, oh, there's a loving God that is in connection with you. But it was very, xenophobic, ethnocentric, homophobic. I was a queer man growing up. I didn't know how to make sense of that. And so in my high school and college years, I looked for everything else. So like I started Qigong and learned about Taoism and Buddhism and Hinduism, and just like what else is there that I could make sense of and understand my experience. I couldn't quite put it all together. So like any self-respecting, semi-millennial, I Googled, how do I put this all together? And I found Ken Wilber and the integral world, integral theory. And I started listening to all that. And Ken Wilber provided a map that actually made it all fit, seemingly, right? It's like, oh, this is how it all fits together. And kind of fast forward, I was living a life where I was kind of doing my integral life practice, working my body, my mind, my spirit, my shadow. That was kind of the integral life practice frame of how do I practice waking up. And it was beautiful. I left my comfort zone and went to live in multiple countries, thinking that that was what I was supposed to do. I did the Peace Corps, did service in Peru and in Nigeria, and thought that that's what I was meant to be doing, really helping other countries develop their capacity to protect the environment or to develop vocational skills and, provide microcredit for widows and that sort of thing. But I still was living this story that there was something out there that was more significant, and that my own personal story was, just secondary. Just, my life desires, my needs were kind of put to the side. It didn't matter. What was really important was this devotion to the ultimate, and I was able to reclaim, because of integral theory, reclaim my root Catholic upbringing in a more mystical, upgraded way, in a devotional way to God in the second person. Mark Claire talked about this first person experience of waking up to true self. We can also have that in the second person experience of waking up to the relationship with the divine. And so that relationship brought me to these other countries. But what ended up happening is I would neglect my need for my own sexual orientation. My sexuality was sort of off the table for whatever reason. My need to kind of develop a sense of expertise and profession and career kind of off the table. It didn't matter. My life story didn't really matter. And then I met Mark at Integral Spiritual Experience in 2009. And the topic was unique self. And so the whole 3-day workshop, retreat, conference, I don't know what to call it. It was a major event. There were 500 people there from all over the world, kind of all the great integral pioneers and practitioners. And Mark set the context of the entire event as this process of unfolding who you were meant to become, that you are a unique expression of the field of love and awareness and eros and interconnectivity, and that you actually have unique gifts to give, and that your whole self matters. And so for the first time, I had this awakening experience of, oh, you mean there's a place for all of me, right? A place for all of me. And so since then, I've been, studying a lot with Mark and other people, but Mark's my teacher, and he's really helped me to see my own personal love story, my own personal evolutionary story in the context of this greater evolutionary story. And here we are. He brought us three together, right? So
here we are.
yeah.
How did that impact you when you, because it almost feels like for both Claire and David, so I guess the question's for both, is that it seems like at the point of unique self, there's like a reclamation of a huge personal aspect of ourselves that maybe we feel like on the enlightenment journey that we're meant to abandon. Like, these bits, no, in enlightenment, like desire, oh no, and it's like, oh, my sexuality, not sure about that. And it seems like traditionally in some of the enlightenment practices, there's this abandonment. So how did it impact you to kind of almost reclaim those? What was the felt experience and also the lived experience of that?
So maybe this is a great opportunity to tell you how I met Claire, because this is how it all is woven together. So I was in Nigeria in 2011, and I was living my ecstatic. I was so in love with my life, but it wasn't. But all this was kind of neglected, right? And I got sick a lot, right? I actually got typhoid once and malaria twice, and just like my body was just like, hey, what have you been doing? Just ignoring me and neglecting me, right? And I was facilitating a leadership development program, an integral leadership development program in Nigeria with 30 leaders, local leaders, and Claire was brought in as one of the integral coaches to help facilitate. And at the time, she turned towards me and she said, I'd love to coach you as well. And here I was kind of, my body was broken, my spirit was strong. And Claire recognized that. And the main practice that she gave me was actually to tap into my body, literally like touch my belly and ask the question, what do I need right now? And it brings tears to my eyes because I hadn't asked that question for so many years. And it gave me the realization that, oh, there's this whole life story that I had just bypassed for so many years that was calling me. And I had this attachment to like, oh, doing international development was my path, living in hard to live countries and doing development work and applying for grants. And that was really my separate self identity. I thought that was how I was going to change the world. But so to answer your question now more directly, is that continually asking that question brought me back to my home country, to my home city, to reclaim my sexuality. I came out of the closet actually to my family and friends in the year after that, to establish my physical health, to start taking supplements and doing exercise and getting a job. I got my master's degree and realized, oh, having an education is actually helpful, and finding a niche in what is my gift in the marketplace. It actually was the beginning of my unique gift, was not just this separate self kind of international development thing. So I studied organizational development, and kind of the story went on and on from there. And ultimately, it was about asking the question of what do I need, and also how is evolution calling me in every moment to step up and to take my next action. So that was a little taste of it anyway. I don't know if Claire, you want to add anything for your journey here.
Yes. Well, thank you. It's just touching me to listen to remember that period. Yeah. How it showed up for me. Well, at the time as I was telling you, Sabri, I read this book in 2012. It blows my mind. I have to meet the guy. So I find him. Well, he was actually teaching that first class on unique self right after the book came out. So I signed up for the class. So at the time, I think it was still teleclasses. We didn't have Zoom. It was calls. So it was, yeah. So I take that class and I'm listening I'm in Europe and I'm in Paris at the time, and the class is somewhere in California. So it's in the middle of the night for me, but I do almost all of the classes on, I'm like really obsessed. So it's the time when I was still taking teleclasses in the middle of the night. I don't do that anymore, but at that time I was. So that's how I meet Marc. And then it was the second festival. So it's 2013. And I go to Holland in the summer to meet Marc. And I start to study with him. And so Marc quickly asked me to how Marc invites people, sees their unique self and puts them with exactly the right person so that there is a synergy. And this is what happened with me. He has a very good friend in California who is also an integral coach. He puts us together. We actually knew each other from our training, and he asks us to create a unique self coaching methodology. And so I'm actually bringing that to the place because it really gave me the opportunity to do exactly what I was wanting. Like earlier I was telling you, my quest was, what do I do with this? And not that this was the answer to what do I do with my awakening, but it taught me just creating this process with Barbara and the span. I can tell you more about the story, but basically it was just a beautiful story of two, Barbara and I, Barbara Alexander, who's the co-creatrix of the unique self-emergence process. We did it together in the span of 9 months. I mean, it was just like we sparked each other so beautifully. I mean, we were so inspired. It was so evolutionary. There was so much, creative energy with us to get the synergy. It was a unique self symphony. So we just brought our two minds together, our two hearts, and we just created this process. It was just a beautiful just spark of creativity. So it gave me a lot of I started to live as my unique self in terms of channeling my creative energy, uh, creating something, doing what's mine to do. Before that, I was doing a lot of things and trying to integrate a lot of things. I was also very excited when I discovered integral theory. Everything was falling into place, but I didn't know what was mine to do. And so being in this creative spark for many years really gave me a sense of what it is to be in your unique self, what it is to do what's yours to do versus when I'm not. And so it helped me just be more aware of what's mine to do, where when I'm in my unique self, when I'm not. And it just taught me a lot of sometimes it just helped me to discern who, what's my path, what's not. And not that I don't always stray out of my path, but I have more capacity to discern when I'm in my pleasure, when I'm in my game, and then when I'm outside of it, and to readjust my path when I'm not. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. How many people do you think, like, on their path, really, it isn't, it's not even their path, it's just a path that they feel like they have to walk? Would you say that's the case for most people?
Well, it was definitely my case, as a woman, as someone who grew up in a culture and in a family where I come from a Mediterranean culture. My half of my family is Italian. My I mean, it's so I come from quite a conventional family. So my role as a woman, and I was the mother of three at the time teenagers when I met Mark. So I was very invested in a lot of roles. And I'm still, my story, I didn't get rid of my story. I still have the roles that I have, but I became more discerning of what's mine to do, even in those roles that I had embraced by default, by the virtue of growing up in a particular culture and chooses making certain choices. So I became more and increasingly, it's still a journey for me, but there is a sense of, when I'm in my story, when I'm doing what's mine to do, there is pleasure, there is eros, there is a sense of purpose, there is a big yes. Even if it's hard, it doesn't mean that it's not hard. Sometimes it's hard. When I'm not, there is resentment, there is duty, there is, duty is actually can be in both, but resentment and overwhelm. And so it's just a very different taste.
Yeah, you mentioned then Eros, and I would love to ask both of you how you would describe Eros. Again, for people who aren't familiar with the term in the context of the center and how it's used here, I'd love to get both of your takes and feelings of what Eros will be for people that aren't familiar with the term in the way that it's used here.
I'll start, if I may. For me, Eros is, first of all, is pleasure and just expansion and just Eros is just life, it's life. And there's a sense of being alive, totally alive. And so in that, there's just a deep appreciation and gratitude. I mean, Eros is so, Eros is just it's the experience of being alive. If I have to put it in a few words, the experience of being truly alive in my life, in my body, in this moment. And of course, it's not limited to that. So I'll give it to David to just give us another taste.
Yeah. Well, and I know what your listeners are probably thinking right now, right? Eros, you mean sex, right? that's that's where everyone goes. The first thing people think of Eros is sex, right? That's the common misunderstanding. And of course, then we think, oh, maybe the Greeks, they talked about Eros, agape, all the different types of love, and we're actually talking about it in a little bit different way, because as Dr. Marc Gafni often says, is that the way our modern or our culture has done is actually exiled what Claire just described, which is the experience of Eros, into merely the sexual realm. And so that's the only place that most of us actually have ever had that experience of our aliveness in a certain sense. But what we're talking about is actually that aliveness that we feel in sexuality is actually sourced in Eros, which is the source of all aliveness. And it's actually the energy that is infused in all things and binds the cosmos together and creates more and more larger wholeness and more interconnectivity. It's the very force that moves evolution from the great Big Bang that we have heard about 13.8 billion years ago, right? So that force there's the one force. It's not kind of agape, eros. No, it's the one eros that actually is moving the whole thing. And each of us, our source, if we trace even our pleasure, our desire, our aliveness back, it'll always trace back to that, which is what we call eros. And by living our unique self, by living what's ours to do, by being in touch with our own deepest identity, which is we are unique expressions of the field of aliveness of eros, we actually experience our eros, right? So when we clarify that this is separate self and that's not really my entire being, but actually no, we experience true self, the whole field of aliveness of eros, and then we inhabit our individuality and recognize, oh, this is what I'm called to do. That is how we access our aliveness and our eros.
And so when we let that inform our next action with an open heart, it's a practice, right? With an open body, an open mind, an open heart, and allow for Eros to inform our next action, our next what's there to do. How do I respond to this? What's my response? Then that becomes the practice of being an embodiment of the erotic impulse, living through me, as me, and in me uniquely.
Yeah, I love both of the descriptions there. And I think, Claire, when you said aliveness, I think that's often what I feel when I know that I'm in my eros. It's almost like, I could be asked to do something, and when you might say, like, you'll say yes, but you almost feel like it's like okay, yeah, I can do that. But then there's like something that you can be called to where I use the term meerkat. When a meerkat is like, there's like the back straight and it's looking like, it's like, yeah, that's me. It's like when I feel all the cells in my body turn into meerkats, like, like that's how I almost imagine it. And you have those moments where you feel that it feels like every cell in the body is alive and shouting yes.
Yeah, and it can be hard, right? It's not going to be necessarily easy or smooth, but there is that meerkat energy. Yes, you're responding to the call, to your unique call.
Yeah. And to me that almost feels like sometimes, like, if I was to connect to God, and that word can mean different things for a lot of people, but it's almost that I feel. It's almost like when I feel most alive. So if I'm trying to tune in, and I'm trying to navigate. Okay, well, like where do I go from here? What's the decision I need to make around this? And I'll kind of ask, and I always try to exit the thinking mind in a way to kind of clear a space for this aliveness to arise, so I can actually, because it feels like, when we're busy in our busy lives, we can sometimes, I feel like the my awareness of that can diminish slightly. So I've taken the time to actually go, okay, let me feel into this. Is it this? Is it this? And I can feel the aliveness, and it's almost like that's the guiding star for me, is that feeling of like, if there's that aliveness, it's like, okay, yeah. And sometimes it's not, like you said, it's not actually the easy thing. Sometimes it's maybe I've got to tell this person, no, I can't do that thing, because I feel in saying yes to it, there's actually a diminishment. And it's not that, okay, sure, we're not always, like, maybe not everything we're always going to do is come from this aliveness, but when it comes to like a decision that seems more important, being able to kind of locate that feeling. I think there's a lot of people that have maybe never experienced that full aliveness in the thing that guides their decision making.
There's really a useful distinction here also, because a lot of people might be thinking, wait a minute, a lot of people feel really energized doing terrible things, right? And so how is that a good litmus test? But there's a key distinction, because when we talk about eros, it's the definition Dr. Marc has created, which might be really helpful right now, is the experience of radical aliveness, but not just the experience, moving toward greater wholeness and deeper connectivity. Right, so there's a litmus test, a three-part litmus test. Is this the way to discern? Is, do I feel alive, and is this moving me toward creating more wholeness in myself, in the people around me? Is it connecting me, or is it pushing me away and separating and bolstering my own ego and putting someone else down? And is that aliveness? Well, that's actually pseudo eros. That's a helpful distinction too, right? So when we actually are moving into genuine eros, those three pieces come together: our aliveness, moving towards more wholeness and deeper connectivity.
And I guess that feels again like very much akin to the idea of unique self, which is, because there it's also including the true self aspect, which feels like the greater wholeness and connectivity.
Exactly. Yeah, we're all connected in the field together, right? And so honoring that field, if we make a choice that pulls us away from the field and disconnects us, then it's actually coming from separate self, right? And there's also another thing, just you mentioned. Oh, go ahead,
Excuse
Claire.
me. I'm just adding that the idea that it's always in relationship. It's the experience of. So, Sabri, I love what you were saying, because you're rightly pointing to the fact that eros is interior. It's an interior experience. There's an interiority to eros. So looking for the answer of what should you do, this or that, outside of you is not going to bring you to your eros, right? So it needs to be interiorly informed, and then there is this this relationship. And there's this connectedness with the outside, the intimacy with the other. Yeah, so it's those three dimensions: the interior, the I thou, the relationship, and also the evolutionary impulse moving through you uniquely, uh, creating greater wholes for the benefit of all. So there's just this three dimensions to it.
Wonderful.
Yes, we're all
Thank you.
trying to say the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So the unique self emergence process. Could you give us an overview of what this process looks like, and also how it differs to maybe some of the more traditional models that
Mm,
exist?
sure, I'll try. Um, I like to describe it as a psycho-spiritual technology, because first of all, it really is a process that moves, that facilitates the emergence of that consciousness of unique self. So basically, in the process of 9 months, the process takes you from it takes you through a series of practices. It's like an incubator. You just start into this process and you begin to first dismantle this shell of your separate self, right? And so you begin to, and there's a lot of things that we do in that first part of the process that are therapeutic. They're about working with ego identifications, or so there's shadow work, there's all kinds of things that are familiar to you for sure, certainly. And we use tools that help dismantle that hard shell of the separate self. That's the first part of the process. Then there is a part in the process that's bridge. That part is the first one, and then we go into a part where we're more interested in opening vistas and thinning the veil between separate self and true self. True self being what we said earlier, that oneness consciousness. And here we introduce the participants to different tastes of true self. So I mentioned Zen practice. David mentioned mystic Christianism. There are all kinds of different ways to enter true self and have different experiences. So that's the part where it's kind of a way of helping our participants tap into as many tastes of true self they can have, so that they can uniquely feel into what's their entry, what's the cultivation that's going to nourish them, so that they can begin to ongoingly have practices that help them cultivate that access to source. And from that, now we have the ground. Now that the person is more able to see their separate self as object, and that separate self is still subject, but more or less they're able to say, oh, that's my separate self. So I'm not just that separate self. It's not just, it doesn't have me, that identification. I have it. I can see it, right? And then, oh, I can source into true self. So now I have the ingredients to start coming from my unique self. And then in that aspect of the work, we introduce practices that are specifically designed to hone on that unique self's gifts and unique capabilities. So we use a lot of some lenses from Dr. Marc's Dharma teachings that are, I don't know if maybe, well, you were at the festival last year, so you heard about lines and circles a lot. Mm-hmm. And so we use lines and circles in this particular aspect of the work to work with polarities and to help someone just become more aware of what their unique self gifts are, and to be coming from that place, and so that they can be of contribution to the world and be in that relationship with the world, so that their eros can be fully or more fully expressed in relationship with all their unique selves. So that's the kind of short description of what the process is about. It's a 9-month process, and 9 months is just, it just happened that it's 9 months, but I think it's perfect because it's really a birth. And it's a process that you can reiterate. It's a spiral, so you go through it once and you can go through it many times, because each time you go through a layer of the onion, it's an ongoing iteration of practices that become part of you. So once you have them in your system, they're kind of downloaded, and you can engage them as you need. So I'd love to hear David talk about it, because somehow, I mean, I created the process with Barbara, so we never were just participants of the process. We actually created the process that we wanted to have, we would have liked to receive. We always said that, this what we created was what we were looking for that we didn't find, and we created it. So I'd love to hear David say and speak about it.
Yeah, because I went through the whole program myself, right? And so I can share a few examples. And also another thing to add about how it makes it different from a lot of other kind of growth programs is that there seems to be two big camps. One is personal development to make me feel more, whole and, you know, just kind of making my life better, right? In whatever ways. And then there's like the awakening camp, which is actually waking up kind of to what's ultimately real. And this blends both of them, right? It's actually helps a person become who they're really meant to be in all the biggest ways. And of course, Claire brings in integral coaching as a methodology, which is an integration of the greatest leverage points for human transformation that have been consolidated and synthesized into the integral coaching process. So that's that. And then, your listeners might have heard these principles and been like, wow, this is fascinating. There's actually a psychoactive quality to it. Just listening and learning them actually points out who we really are and opens us up. But without those principles showing up in the story of our lives, as Mark often says, it's all words until it shows up in the story of our lives. It doesn't fully land. And this program is the only one to actually bring all these principles into an embodied practitioner, practice oriented, fundamentally program. Right. And so I can give a little bit of an example of my experience. Lines and circles, for example, and we don't go into the whole what are lines and circles so much, but for basically think lines, and you think of let's just say, moving forward, making things happen, penetrating reality, being steady, powerful, that sort of way. That's a line set of line qualities. Circle qualities are, holding, resting, receiving, being receptive to the flow, opening up to possibility, letting emergence happen, connections, relationships. Those are circle qualities. And a unique self is an integration, a healthy dance between these qualities. And in this process, we actually go through and say, like, where are you? Do you have a circle quality in shadow? And so how can we kind of bring it into the light, right? And so in my example, I have a lot of circle qualities. You may or may not realize that. But all of last year, I felt a strong emphasis on circle and sort of resting in my home with my community and embracing lots of relationships and, just being present and just sort of going with the flow. And I felt like there was something that was stuck. I wasn't moving forward in my life. And so what Claire helped me realize is, oh, you have line qualities in shadow, right? And so once we discern what line qualities are in shadow, she gave me some practices to work with it. And just a simple example is something called what do we even call it? I think we had a couple different names for it. But every day, actually starting the day with what is my vision for what I want to create or what's happening through me, and what are steps I can take towards moving towards that vision. Simple practice, but it cultivates line energy, right? And then what I'm working on right now is more of a breakthrough energy, and so I challenged myself a little bit more than I have been. The last week I've been waking up early and training in Aikido a lot more, and sort of breaking through my comfort zone, and I feel like this energy just flowing through me in a whole new way, because line qualities were kind of stuck in shadow, and they're allowed to flow, right? And of course, the best way to do it is always to have it in dance with circle qualities. So we go through the whole process around that, right? Looking at where those energies are stuck. So that's line and circle qualities. I can give you one more example of the program, if that's all right. Yeah.
Please do.
So in one of the first module, the separate self module, we look at our false self. So the part of our separate self identity that, during early childhood, was wounded in a particular way, and we create stories and, false beliefs about ourselves, like I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable. Mine was I don't belong. And that's the story that we all have, a version of that story that is unconsciously driving the show a lot of the times. And as much meditation and journaling and practice I've done over the years, I was never quite able to transform that or to kind of get into a better relationship with it until this practice that Claire gave me, which is the false self-observation practice, where I would, anytime I felt triggered, and go into a shame spiral of like, oh, I don't belong in this group, oh, they're going to reject me, or I'm not good enough to be in here, whatever, I would, instead of running away, which is a sort of a natural tendency, I was able to sit with it, feel it come up, and actually go into it with a lot of compassion, which is actually abundantly available. Like, we live in a field of love, so why wouldn't compassion be available all the time, right? Which I didn't quite capture. And Claire helped me realize this, like, oh, yeah, just inviting a little bit more compassion to it and being with it, not trying to fix anything, not trying to say don't be that way, or overcoming it, or even transforming is not even the right word, right? It's actually just being with it, inviting compassion until it naturally, on its own accord, it softens and it releases,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a spaciousness that opens up. And from that
And
spaciousness, then I can ask the question of, what is mine to do? What does reality really need from me?
right.
And I can show up.
Beautiful, David. I love to hear you describe it like that. And what I want to add to this is that what David just described, a practice that actually takes about 3 months to become part of you. So that he described it like a one thing, but it's like it's incremental, and that's the so it becomes embodied. And the reason the way that it becomes embodied is that it's an integral practice. It works on different layers of your being. It works on the mind, it works on the feelings, it works on the body. And the practice itself is, that's why we say it's psychoactive. It metabolizes the pain body that would have David escape those situations and run away and believe the story. And so, yeah, it's an important part of the process to be able to. That's what I meant earlier. It allows for those parts of you to become object. So you recognize them, take care of them, and you metabolize the story, the pain, the actual frequency and energies that are attached to that part, to those parts.
Yeah, and this the sort of secret, which I hesitate to share, but it's the deepest truth of this unique self-realization, is that even the false self patterns that keep us stuck and that are just such a problem all the time, right? Once we transform our relationship to them, they actually become the source of our greatest gifts. They actually serve to awaken our unique selves, right? So
Yeah.
it all is part of the symphony of ourselves and of
Yeah,
the cosmos.
that's the tikkun that we call that in in our jargon, or in our teachings. It's the fixing, it's the healing that happens. The wound is part of the whole story. Actually, the thread of the story.
Yeah, I really like know that to be true. That very often that it's like wound plus love equals healing, but also gift.
Yeah,
I really know that to be true. And I've mentioned this before, and I know Mark likes to look at films and see where the stories are, and one that it's quite funny because I did a story about this before I actually came across Mark, so it's over a year ago, and it's probably been the most viewed story on any channel that I've done. But have you both seen the Disney film Moana?
Yeah, it's a great movie. Yeah.
no, I haven't. No.
So I'll try and condense it down, but a lot of people miss this. And David, I don't know if you've spotted this. And I remember because my daughter would watch it loads when she was younger. And one time I was watching it, I went, hang on a minute. So there's this bit where there's Moana. Basically, if you imagine, there's a character, a demigod, who steals the heart from Tafiti, and Tafiti is kind of like, it's the island, but it's like the deity or the goddess that gives all life, and he steals the heart, and it's green, it's the heart chakra color, gets stolen, and then all the vegetation, all the land starts dying off. So Moana's mission is to go and return the heart to Tafiti, to bring back all life to the islands. And whilst they're doing it, they've got to try to overcome this lava monster, Takar, that is trying to basically stop them. And they're trying to fight Takar, they're trying to figure it out. And then there's this moment of recognition where Moana pauses and she can speak to the ocean and she says, "Let it come to me." And then there's this like slow motion bit where she starts singing. It's really powerful. And she recognizes that Takar isn't this monster that needs defeating. It's actually Tafiti that became Takar because the love was taken away. The heart was taken away. So she returns the heart to Takar, and in returning the heart, which is returning the love, then goes from Takar to Tafiti. Now, here's the bit that everyone misses. And David, I'm going to send you the link so you can watch it after. As she becomes Tafiti, you have a look. It's Moana's face. It's actually Moana. And
Interesting.
I don't know anyone that's actually spotted that, but you see the like Tafiti come, and it's Moana's face, and it was you look at that film like, oh, this is a film about shadow work.
Yeah.
And literally she returns the love to this part that basically had the love taken away from it, and then turns into the goddess that gives all life to the village.
So beautiful. I want to see the movie.
Oh yeah, it's a powerful movie. There's so many unique self themes in Disney movies, right? Moana be one of those.
My daughters are older. I watched all the Disney movies while they were growing up, but I missed some as of late. So I have to.
Yeah, it was powerful. I love how you both described what the unique self-emergence process is, and combining the physical, the spiritual, and then being combined. Like you said, there's this path or there's that path, but how do they combine? Because we are both, right? And everything you've described, it sounds really complete, and the depth of understanding. I mean, I'm glad you touched on lines and circles, David, because I actually, when Claire had mentioned it, I wrote down line circle, because I thought, like, again, people who aren't familiar with the terms, and it's great that you said it, and it's like the intricacy that, and there's layers to it, isn't there? Because even the idea with shadow work, and some people have the understanding that, oh, embrace the shadow means just accept the fact that I get angry, I lose my temper, and that's that. Thinking like that's what the acceptance of it is, rather than truly accepting the part. And David, what you said about, like, through the empathy and the compassion, it actually starts to change. It almost becomes like self-healing, self-orienting, self-balancing. And there's so many people, in fact, I made a reel about this, I think, yesterday, that feel shame and rejection around their triggers or around their shadow. And it's like, that was the very thing that created it. And for as long as they feel shame around those aspects, it's like, it's just almost like more fuel on the fire.
A vicious cycle, yeah.
So self-compassion is actually a huge component of the work in the first 3 months. And self-compassion, as David beautifully said, can only be sourced in compassion, which is what we call outrageous love in our jargon, which is the field in which I fell fully when in that experience that I shared about. I mean, self-compassion comes from that place. There's no like self-love and love out there. It's all one big field. So redirecting someone's psyche to that source is hugely important. There's no healing without that capacity.
So would you say it's almost that the compassion that they're drawing from is from the field of
Yeah,
compassion or
we
the
can't
field of love?
love ourselves if we don't tap into that love. I mean, that's what the mother gives us, a physical mother or a caregiver when we're born, is that bridge between the field of love and us. So we have the mother, which fulfills that role. And so what we're doing when we are learning or redirecting someone towards their self-love is like we're helping them access the mother within their mother. It's very circle quality. It's like finding my inner mother, and from that inner mother, then I tap into the mother love, right?
It's so interesting you said that. The last time I did ayahuasca, which was about a year ago, one of the things that came up for me during that journey was it was saying mother, 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 and I was going mother, mother, and then I got to I am mother, I am mother, I am mother, and I thought, what does that mean? I am mother, and actually, it basically described what you just said, and that was part of the journey was pointing to that. Like, I don't have to be a woman to be mother.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
was like, okay. And that was like this really profound realization about actually within me, I do feel there's quite a lot of motherly kind of nurturing within me. And that was what was being pointed out. And then it was about the greater mother.
and of course, Mama Ayahuasca is like the best teacher for that. But yeah, so what you're describing is really that circle quality of embracing, and the mother is a very circle, just as there is a father, and there is there are all the archetypes that live in us. But yeah, that capacity to be in touch with our inner mother and to give ourselves that acceptance and that love is the beginning of being able to move on to our unique self, because there's no way we can grow and transform if we're not accepting where we are, where if we don't have that capacity to turn towards the wound, right? um, then like it's impossible to move, to really heal if we don't turn towards the wound and accept it as it is.
And it's only from there that then we can access the Father, right? The inner Father that calls us to our unique risk, calls us to take the steps we need to take in this life beyond a separate self-comfort zone, go into that risky territory like Moana when she left the island. She's like, I can't leave the island. This is I'm not supposed to leave, right? But taking that risk, the Father calls
That's
us,
hero. That's the hero energy.
right? So
The
calls us out and
taking your unique risk, right? That's the energy.
yeah. And then
Yeah.
and actually be in that unknown for some time. And that's a lot of your listeners are probably in this unknown space. I'm lost. How do I find myself, right? And actually if we're able to rest in that field and trust that the field is loving us, and trust that we're actually here, the field wants us to show up. The field will tell us in whatever form, right? So many different ways, infinite ways.
I think that was a really beautiful distinction, actually, about it's only when we feel the mother, which is the love and the compassion and maybe like somewhat of a sense of being nurtured and safe, that we can then lean into the fatherly risk. And I've never considered it in that order before. And actually, as you said that, I'm like, oh, I can really feel that order is like by having that, accessing that motherly energy, that field to feel that then gives me the sense of kind of safety and nurture from within to actually take the risk from that place.
Well, think of how we learn how to walk, right?
Mm.
We learn how to walk by being praised and encouraged and received when we fall, and from that secure attachment place, we move on with that hero energy and start taking our unique, our walks. And that's really it's an archetypal journey.
Amazing. So the 9 month program, it almost feels like it's a gestation period
Mhm.
for the rebirth. So is this, so you're launching the online version of
Yeah.
this, and for people that are hearing this, there's things that are pinging in them that feel called to find out more. What's the best way for them to go about it?
Um, well, they can schedule a call with us, so we can tell them all about it and answer the questions. But before that, they can find out about the program on our website. And David, do you have the address
I can add
handy?
that there. Yeah.
This will be probably in your description. So
Yeah, I'll add the links in for people to be able to find that. Yeah.
but yes, we have a website where the whole process is described, and they can schedule a call with us, and there's an application process. Um, David, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add something that, this, as we've already described, this isn't just a self-help program, right? We're at a time in the world where we need people to wake up to their fullest selves, their unique selves, because there's needs that need to be addressed, right? And so this unique self-emergence process is actually, it has two prongs to it. One is I'm transforming, going through the process of unique self-emergence myself. And the second is I learn to do it with other people. So we're actually going to sit with participants and supervise their coaching process and give them the tools to then be able to go out and work with other people, clients, in whatever form those are. So it actually ripples out, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for adding this, David. When Barbara and I created a process, that was obvious for us that this was what we wanted to do, and that's right. I didn't give this detail. We wanted to empower change agents, people who already work with people who have their coaching practice or their therapeutic practice, or that are spiritual directors, people who work with people in some capacity, who help them heal or transform. And so we wanted to give them this technology so that they could, whatever work they were doing with people, they could enhance it by channeling all that energy towards unique self. And so our program is actually a training program for professionals who work with people in that sort of capacity, to help them kind of, what's the word? Just make their, whatever they do, they can. The process is you can incorporate or integrate the process in whatever you're doing already.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you have to give up what you're doing and start doing the unique self emergence process. You can totally integrate it in whatever you're doing in your work with people, and so you can only enhance it because it's focused on the topic of all topics, which is becoming your unique self.
It sounds like it's almost something that would allow someone to enter into a new paradigm,
Mm.
and then even if they're still in the same modalities, but with that paradigmatic shift,
Yes, that's
that
very well said.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. A new story. And as we know in developmental psychology, when we learn a new story of reality, it actually transforms who we are. Our identity shifts, right? And everything comes from there. Every action actually comes out of our story of who we are. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I heard a quote from Dr. David Hawkins recently, which was a miraculous transformation takes place by one's uh, positionality dissolving and
Mm.
taking a new one. And it
Mm.
almost feels like a similar type of thing. It's like when our existing position of how we view the world dissolves and changes, there's like a miraculous transformation that takes place.
Yeah. I love you. You just did a video on it a few days ago, right? Or last week or something. You talked about it, something like that, right? And I remember that. And it was just being able to loosen up who we think we are and be able to actually find who we really are in a certain sense.
Yeah. I love it. It sounds incredible. So I'll add the links for people to be able to find it. And is there anything else that you'd like people to know, or that you'd like to share? Anything we've not covered yet?
I think we covered a lot. Anything feels that we missed?
Well, I just
David?
invite everyone to trust your allurements. The deeper allurements are pulling you somewhere, and the specific form that it takes may change. It may be what you think it is, it may be something different, but there's something there, and just take one more step closer to it, whatever that is. It will lead you on your path. And I just want to, I pray that everyone is able to discover who they really are in this lifetime, and show up more fully with a lot more love, because that's what this is all about, right?
Aho.
Amen.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Something I've been thinking about a lot recently is the idea of freedom being connected to having nothing to hide and nothing to prove. And it feels like that kind of like a lot of unique self really is in that. Is like, hey, there's nothing to hide. Like, this is me uniquely, and also there's nothing for me to prove around that. It's just, so yeah, I love that, David. Thank you. Well, thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you, Sabri. It was a pleasure. Total pleasure.
Thank you so much.
And I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Thank
you
you
both.
All right. Much love.